Senator Hall, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for allowing me to join in with you on this, Mary, because it's something I've been in this fight since March of 2020, when I just happened to stumble into a doctor's office for an unknown expected visit and learn what was happening with the doctors with regards to not being allowed to treat patients the way they thought they should be treating them. And that's what got me started. And so I brought together and had many a Zoom interview with doctors. Rich Urso was one of the first ones we had on. Name others, Dr. Ben Marble, Stella Emanuel, Angelina Farella was there, Amy Offit, and dozens of others over the last 2 years. And one of the biggest thorns that we found in this whole thing was the Texas Medical Board. They're an unelected body. They're appointed by the governor. They're not part of the legislature. They're part of the executive branch. And they are supposed to be protecting the people of Texas, but they've been doing anything but that. They find themselves as elitist, and it's an unelected body that of bureaucrats has just been interfering with the doctor-patient relationship. They have intimidated doctors with baseless investigations for trying to save lives through early treatment of COVID-19. Every step of the way, they got in the way. The TMB normally off-label prescriptions, but for the last 2 years has done so with respect to COVID treatments like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and budesonide. They have gone after doctors for prescribing those off-label, which is a standard practice. I'm not a doctor, but many of them have told me as much as 60% of prescriptions are written off-label. So there's nothing untoward about what doctors have been doing, yet that is what the medical board has gone after them for. And what's amazing is that we do have thousands of hospital patients who have died after receiving remdesivir treatments, and it's being reported that as many as 85% of the people who go on ventilators in the hospitals die. And yet the TMB has chosen not to investigate any of that. Those who don't know, remdesivir was a drug that was brought out and tried on Ebola, but in the trials, over 50% of the people in the trials died from it, and they decided this wasn't going to cure much with half the people dying if they took it. And they brought it back out for COVID. In fact, in all this time, we actually had more people that got sick or died from poisoning by drinking hand sanitizer than were affected by ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. We've got to have a system where our patients can actually choose the doctors without the state bureaucracy getting in their way. Complaints to the TMB should only come from patients or their families, not anonymous or confidential members of the public, or pharmacists, or political agenda, disgruntled colleagues, doctors who want to use TMB to put their competition out of business, and that is a very common practice of one doctor reporting another just to hurt their business. And cases should be resolved within 60 days unless an extension is requested by the doctor, and all cases dismissed should be done with prejudice. What that means is it's dismissed. It can't be brought up again. It's over and done with. There's no dragging out. We're finding both the Nurses Board and the Texas Medical Board are dismissing without prejudice, which means they leave the door open to come back and harass the doctor later. And if a doctor wants to prescribe an off-label drug, or a patient wants an off-label drug and his or her doctor agrees with that approach, the TMB should not get between them and that decision. And there's got to be more transparency at the TMB process. We need to eliminate confidential complaints. That is because who is making the complaint is just as important as the complaint itself. We need to require the TMB to provide an exact copy of the complaint to the doctor in the initial letter from TMB to the doctor, and require that those complaints be notarized as a sworn statement. So the person recognizes they're going to say something that puts a doctor's license and life in jeopardy. They doggone well better be telling the truth about it. And if it's a legitimate complaint, no one should ever have a problem in doing that. Eliminate completely third and fourth hand complaints. Think about that. They accept and run with third and fourth hand complaints. Nobody in law enforcement would do anything like that. And they do that without confirming that the patient that is involved in it even exists, much less saw the doctor. But TMB will pick that up and start an investigation. Third and fourth hand. Only accept second-hand complaints from family members and caretakers with patient's concurrence. That is, if they're not capable of doing the complaint themselves, it at least has to be with their concurrence. And all investigations must be specific and not a fishing expedition. Talk to a doctor that gets a request from TMB on a complaint, and what they're doing is asking for a box full of records that gives them an opportunity just to thumb through the records and see what else they can find. They need to limit the investigations to the specific incident and not be a fishing expedition. And we should limit only those instances when someone was actually harmed. Breaking a rule or appearing to break a rule is not serving and punishment for that is not serving the people. And there should be no investigation of any kind for a doctor exercising his or her first right to express, amendment to express their opinion. And that would mean that those doctors that believe and that ivermectin works, the hydroxychloroquine works, budesonide, or anything else, if that's their personally held belief, it should not matter to anyone else, period. And we need to decouple Texas from mandatory compliance with federal and World Health Agency publications and directives. Take them as information only, nice to read about, and if we agree with it, we'll do it, but we're not required to. And we need to decouple Texas from the National Medical Board Association and the very bad information that they have been putting out. We need to prohibit TMB from new rules without going through the formal rule-making process. And that's what they did with COVID and with hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. They all of a sudden started treating it as though it was alternative medicine, where doctors are required to give informed consent. So while they weren't going after for prescribing the drug to them, they were going after the doctors for not going through the formal informed consent process, which there's no place in the rules that they should be, but they made up the new rule as they went along. And require TMB to adopt a top-down tier policy of no harm, no foul. And we need to restructure their review process, their panel process with the doctors. Instead of just having to have 2 votes in favor of prosecution, we need to have a panel of 8 doctors, at least half of which are of equivalent certification, and the mix of civilians that's required in there, but at least 8, and it must be a conviction with 75%, not just a simple majority. The panel will do its review independently and concurrently instead of sequentially. That is, each doctor gets the case, they review it on their own, make up their own decision, and turn that in without a group discussion on it. And these changes need to be made, and there are others, so these are the top ones, because doctors have spent tens of thousands of dollars and a lot of hours during this process. It has to stop. And so hopefully next session we will do this. We need also to make some changes for our hospitals. For those folks that have had any dealings with people who have been in the hospital lately, it's not the hospital you used to know. It used to be a benevolent place where you went for healing. It's now a place you go where there's somebody that's in charge of it whose main objective is the profit they're going to make, and your well-being is well behind the profit that they're lined up with. And you need to have we need to have a new patient's Bill of Rights. And in that Bill of Rights, it must have, as a minimum, a right to try with or without the doctor's approval. Right now, our right to try, you've got to find a doctor that's willing to do it. Well, I say, if the patient wants it, then we'll absolve the doctor of any responsibility and let them have it. Not everybody would agree with that, but there were a lot of patients out there that wanted to try. They had a doctor that just would not give them hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. So that's the purpose of that. And we have to stop to make sure the patients have a right to visitation. You know, it used to be that the hospital recognized the benefit of having a family member or a loved one there to help them out, even to watch and make sure that mistakes weren't made. But now they restricted people, and we had to pass a bill this last session that prohibited the hospital from restricting a religious counselor. That's the only way we could get somebody in there. But they got a way around it. We weren't quite precise enough, so those that finally gave into it said, yep, we'll let somebody in to get 1 hour a day. And it has to be the same person every day, so that needs to be some fix. Patients should have a right to unrestricted visitation by at least one person at a time. And I don't know how you handle this, but your patient should have a right to not be shamed or bullied. And believe me, there have been plenty of persons in the hospital today that was shamed into taking remdesivir or bullied into taking remdesivir, and that needs to stop. There's many others, but I'll stop with that. And I say we have to recognize that the policies the hospital are operating under, I think when this is all done, and you look at it, you will find that more people have died in the hospital because of hospital policies, not because they had the COVID. So, folks, these changes are needed because the purpose of government is to protect individual liberties. The purpose of government is not to be lord and masters over individuals, and government is not there to give out free stuff. It is to protect individual liberties, and I think these changes for the hospitals and for the Texas Medical Board will go a long way to getting our hospitals back to the benevolent operations they used to be before we got the COVID. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here.
Thank you so much. That was very well said. And now I want to introduce Dr. Angelina Farella.